I'm Claire Evelyn, design enthusiast and space curator. I've been designing and coaching clients for 7 years, helping you create beautiful and functional spaces by learning new techniques, understanding research, and making mindset changes is my area of expertise. I want you to live in a space that compels and inspires you. I created the Spaces Speak podcast to facilitate discussions about higher purposes in design and how anyone can integrate intentional design into their daily lives to improve their habits, routines, and reach their goals. I interview intriguing guests from a variety of disciplines: artists, psychologists, entrepreneurs, authors, and more. Anyone who has knowledge to share to help people redesign their space and transform their life. Before we dive in, I want to tell you about my free design quiz. The quiz will help you figure out not only what interior design style suits you, but also how to get started executing that style in your home. Just head over to trimspaces.com and the button to take the quiz is right there on the home page. Welcome to another episode of Spaces Speak. Today I'm interviewing Terry Tucker. Terry is a motivational speaker, author, and international podcast guest on the topics of motivation, self-development, and mindset. He has a business administration degree from the Citadel and a master's degree from Boston University. In his professional career, Terry has been a marketing executive, a hospital administrator, a SWAT team hostage negotiator, a high school basketball coach, a business owner, a motivational speaker, and, for the past 10 years, a cancer warrior. He is the author of the book Sustainable Excellence: 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life, and the developer of the Sustainable Excellence membership. Terry has also been featured in Authority, Global Thrive, and Human Capital Leadership magazine.
Claire, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Well, I'll jump right in then and ask you the signature question that I've been sticking to. What is the most interesting piece of furniture or decor item in your home that you want to share with us?
And this is probably going to sound weird, but for me, it's my wheelchair. In 2020, I had my leg amputated above the knee. I do have a prosthetic leg. I do use it from time to time, but it's very cumbersome for me. So for me, it's a wheelchair. And we built the house that we live in about 10 years ago, and I had cancer back then, with the thought that, well, maybe we should have a first floor master and things that would, for our lifestyle would work. And that's been great. The downside was I didn't make the doorways large enough to fit the wheelchair. So I have to use the walker anytime I want to go into, a bedroom or a bathroom or something like that.
Yeah, that was not something that was considered back then when you were doing the design.
Yeah.
So do you, is this your first wheelchair? Have you gone through different types, figured out the best one?
Yeah, I had just a generic, we were renting a wheelchair initially. This is a wheelchair that has been specially designed for me. I am.
Oh, wow.
You can't tell this from my voice or from looking at me, but I'm 6'8" tall. So yeah, having a normal wheelchair, leaves the stump part of what's left of my leg, kind of hanging off and stuff like that. So this one is a little bit longer, where it's the stump is supported and things like that. It's designed, for everything. I remember when I first went through the process, I mean, they made me get up and walk in a walker, and like, how fast can you go from this? I'm like, I'm using a wheelchair. Why am I in a walk? I didn't understand the whole dynamics of it, but this is a whole lot better for me from just supporting my body than sort of the generic wheelchair that you'd probably get if you just went to the hospital.
Sure. Yeah, that's so interesting. I didn't realize that they make custom ones, but I guess it makes sense. You want it to be as comfortable and easy to use as possible.
You do. And it's, it's got a cushion that uh, since I'm in it a lot during the day, I mean, I have one still good leg, so I can stand up and stuff like that. It's not like, I'm paralyzed from
Right.
the waist down or anything like that. But and the cushion comes out and it folds up so you can put it in the car and things like that. So it's an interesting piece of equipment that when I was younger, I certainly never expected to have.
No. So other than the doorways presenting an issue, what else have you figured out and that you would have redesigned in your home?
Well, one of the things that we did design, and this was just, I think we were lucky. My wife's brother is a plumber, and he suggested Americans with Disabilities Act toilets. So toilets
Oh,
that were higher and things like that. So that was one thing. Another issue that makes things a little more difficult is carpet. It's
mm,
harder to propel your wheelchair on carpet than it is, say, for tile or for hardwood or something like that. So literally within the last couple weeks, we have put hardwood into our master bedroom and to my office and things like that, just to make it easier. I mean, I still have some pretty good upper body strength. It's not difficult for
sure.
me to wheel myself around, but at the same time, doing that. And I remember when I had my leg amputated, it was right in the middle of the COVID pandemic. And
Ooh,
I should have been in the hospital for a week learning how to use different devices and working with occupational and physical therapy. But because of COVID, my doctor only wanted me in for 48 hours. So I was very fortunate that the occupational therapist that had really kind of reached out to my doctor and said, you need to scan him. There's something wrong here. And where the tumor was found and why I had the leg amputated, actually came over to our house before I got out of the hospital and worked with my wife and said, pick up that carpet. I mean, things
mm,
like throw rugs and things like that, which look nice, are not really good for a wheelchair because they throw
no.
you off balance, they slide and things like that. So she came and helped my wife to take that out. That's a slip hazard. Put bars into your shower that I can grab onto, lift
Right.
myself up and things like that. So it really was a whole kind of redesign of a house that I'm going to use the word normal. I mean, I've never been normal, but as normal as a lot of people can be. And so we kind of had to redesign the best we could with what we had. And a lot of it we had thought of, we never thought I would lose my leg, when I had cancer initially, but we did think of things, like I said, a first floor master, hardwood
Yeah.
in certain areas and things like that.
Yeah. Have you thought of having a designer come through and working with you on other things that are that are now a little more difficult than they used to be to change things? I mean, I'm thinking like desks. Um,
The answer to no, to answer your question, I mean, my desk is, it's permanent, it's fixed to the wall, so it's not something that moves, but it's a pretty good height for me, and I can wheel my
that's good.
wheelchair underneath it. The kitchen table, we just moved a chair out at the head of the table where we had more room so that I could just kind of wheel in and wheel up to it, and it is high
And
enough
it
that
works.
that I can get
That's good.
underneath it and things like that. So we really haven't had anything that has been, other than, like I said, the doorways where, I have to kind of park my chair, grab my walker to get through, a bedroom or a bathroom or something like that.
Right, right. That's good. Yeah, it's sounds like it's good that you thought through the bigger issues ahead of time being stairs.
Yeah,
But
I mean, and we do. We have a finished lower level, and we have bedrooms upstairs. And I just live on the main level. I don't go
mhm,
downstairs. I haven't been up or downstairs. I've been downstairs once in 2 years. I haven't been upstairs since I had my leg amputated. And I don't need to. My office is
right.
on the first floor. The bedroom's on the first floor. The kitchen's on the first floor. So I'm pretty self-contained
That's
and
good.
that works. And my brother-in-law is very handy. And we had a couple stairs from the garage into the house, and so he was nice enough to, once I had the leg amputated, to come and build handrails and things like
Mm,
that, so that I could grab onto and sort of, it's not, it doesn't look real good, but I kind of, lift myself up and,
right.
through the stairs and into the wheelchair and things like that. So I do have a ramp that goes from the garage into the house if I am, if my treatments take a lot out of me, where I just physically am, it's be hard to lift myself up. So, we have those things. We don't usually use them, but they're available and accessible if the need arises.
Right, right. So shifting gears a little bit, I mean, you seem to have such a positive outlook on everything. How has your mindset grown in the last 2 years since you did lose your leg?
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a nurse recently. Funny you should ask that question, because I had a nurse recently ask me what it was like. In 2018, I had my foot amputated. That was the first of my amputations. And then 2020, I had my leg amputated. She said, "What was that like? What was it like to have your foot amputated and your leg amputated?" And I've told her it has not been an easy process. I mean, we're
Mm-mm.
2+ years since my leg amputation, and I'm still learning how to walk again. I was actually, our daughter got married last October, and I was able to use the prosthetic holding on to her to walk her down the aisle. And it
Ah,
was kind of really a funny situation, because she was nervous, she was emotional. And so, she had my arm and she was kind of pulling me. And I had to stop her. I'm like,
uh-oh.
if you pull me, I'm going to fall over. I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah.
that good on this. This is your day. Take your time. Everybody's looking at you. They're not looking at me. So,
Yeah. But I
I,
need your support.
exactly. Yeah. So don't go so fast, and,
Yeah.
just hang on to me and that. So, it worked out great. But what I told the nurses, you know, cancer can take all my physical faculties, but cancer can't touch my mind, it can't touch my heart, and it can't touch my soul. And that's who I am. That's who you are. I mean, this is just this body is just a house or a vessel or whatever you want to call it, to
Mhm.
house who we really are. So I don't get too excited about, when I had chemotherapy, it was like, well, you're going to lose your hair. And it's like, okay, so what? I mean, that's not who I am. I
Right.
understand that people want to look good and want to, when you look good, you feel good and things like that. But to me, it was never about how I looked. It was, how do I feel? What's my mindset right now? And do I need to change that mindset? Do I need to become, say no? And I've got to change this to something that's more positive, because your brain knows your faults, it knows your weaknesses, it knows your vulnerabilities, and it will use those against you if you let it. So you
Mm.
have to control your mind. You have to take that mindset and be like, no, wait a minute, that's a negative thought. I need to change that to something more positive. So really,
That's your
mindset has
first,
been, yeah, incredibly important to get
right.
me, 10 years post my cancer diagnosis.
And that controlling your mind, that's your first of your four truths, right?
Yeah, controlling your mind, or it will control you. And I learned that early on. Well, when I was a little kid, I had several knee surgeries in high. I guess I wasn't little. I was about 6'5" at the time. But I had several knee surgeries in high school, and I remember when I went back playing basketball after those knee surgeries, my brain was putting all kinds of negative thoughts into my mind. Things like, "Hey, you're probably a step slower, and coaches aren't going to be interested in recruiting you." And I remember thinking, wait a minute, I'm still playing at an elite level, and coaches are still reaching out about potentially playing for their college or university. I realized early on in my life that I had to change that negative. I had to change that narrative to something more positive. And I've read numerous articles that say on any given day, we have 60 to 70,000 thoughts that pass through our mind, many of which we don't even pay attention to. They're just here and they're
Right.
gone. But if you think about it, your mind can only hold one thought at a time. Why would you want to make that a negative thought?
True. So is that so that's something you said you learned earlier on. How did you actually learn to change that? How did you learn to, rearrange and say, no, 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 I'm gonna think of this positively?
I think part of it is you need to understand, or you need to realize that, hey, there's a negative thought there. There's something, and then don't get me wrong. I mean, there are days that, I mean, you're looking at me right now. There's no S on my chest. I don't wear a cape, you know. So I mean, I have those bad days. I get
Yeah,
down and things like that, and that's okay. We're human beings. We all do. But you know, people are like, okay, you know, I'm a negative thinking person, or I see the glass as half empty. You know, I want to change that to be something positive, and they think, well, I'm just going to flip a switch and it's going to happen. It doesn't happen that easy. You didn't get to that point, you know, overnight. You're not
right.
going to correct it overnight. So I think the first thing you have to do is realize you have those negative thoughts there. That's okay. Don't beat yourself up because they're there. Just realize they're there and then change it to something positive. And over time, your brain will then expect more positive thoughts than negative thoughts. But again, that's not going to happen, you know, in a week or even in a
No.
month. It's going to take time to realize that, hey, that's a negative thought. I need to change that to something positive, make that change, and then move on. And then, oh, wait a minute, there's another negative thought. Now I need to make that
Change
change. So
that.
it happens incrementally. It's not something that just happens overnight.
Right. You have to make those new neural pathways, right?
You
To
do.
connect them,
Absolutely.
make them stronger. How do you think, or maybe reflecting in your life, how have you seen your environment, your space affecting your negative or positive thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I've always been very active. You know, I started playing basketball when I was like 9 years old, and I got a scholarship to play in college. Played all the way up through college. Eventually became a police officer. Was on, you know, the SWAT team and things like that. So you know, my environment. I mentioned I was 6'8". I have a brother who's 6'7", another brother who's 6'6", and then my dad was 6'5". So I sort of joke that if you sat behind our family in church growing up, there wasn't a prayer's chance you were going to see anything that was going on, you know, in front. But you know, we were a big family, and so you know, but our 5'8" mother was always the boss. But it was, you know, king size beds and things like that that most people don't think about. You know, I'm just going to
Hmm.
go out and get a
Hmm.
bed. Well, for us, it was, I can't just go out and get. I mean, you could, but you know, you don't want your feet hanging over. I remember when I was in
Right.
college, I had a girlfriend, and when I would go home with her to her parents' house, her mom had a twin bed, and they would put a piece of plywood between the mattress and the box spring and put pillows to extend the bed so that I wouldn't
Aw,
hang over. You know,
that's
and
so
it's things,
sweet. Yeah.
yeah, it's things like that that you don't think about if you're, you know, an average size individual. But when you're, you know, you're an athlete and you're big, and so, you know, I always think of people like Shaquille O'Neal or something like that. It's like, oh my God, I mean, he must have a custom made bed, you know, for a man his
Probably.
size and things
Yeah.
like. Yeah, so I mean, it's your environment changes, and my wife will tell you this. I mean, when we designed this house, we made the shower heads taller so that, you know,
Mm.
I mean, I spent my entire life having a shower hit me in the chest, you know, and so it's like, okay, now we're going to do that. But my wife, we were just talking about this the other day. She actually has a step stool in almost every room in the house
Oh my
because the
gosh.
pantry, yeah, the pantry is higher. You know, the closets, the shelves are higher because myself and then our daughter, fortunately or unfortunately, got my height, and she is 6'2" and actually played basketball at the Air Force Academy. And so we built the house for a bigger person as opposed to a normal size individual.
Yeah, yeah. And you think you've seen that actually change your mindset going from maybe your past house to this one?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, even growing up, you know, I mean, you know, we bought houses that, you know, when my parents moved and stuff like that, they're already existing. They didn't build anything. So, you know, like I said, when I was 13 years old, I was 6'5". So, you know, having showers hit you in the chest your whole life, you know, you kind of got to duck underneath to get your hair wet so you can wash your hair and things like that. And you appreciate when you have the ability now to have a shower that actually is above you, and you know, and doesn't just hit you in the chest. You just appreciate it a little bit more then what, I mean, you make it work,
Right.
you make it work the way it is. But when you have the ability to do that, and it's like, hey, can you raise that, a foot? Oh yeah, we can do that now that we're, putting in the plumbing and things like that. Oh, that's great. I'd like you to do that, which is always funny for my wife because my wife can't, she's short enough. She can't reach up and adjust the shower head. It's like, hey, honey, can you move this down for me so that,
Right.
and that. So it's positive for me. It's negative. It's a detraction for her. Whereas a normal size house would be positive for her and a detraction for, my daughter and I.
Right. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Do you notice if it's easier to change or keep your positive mindset at home versus out in public in other spaces? Is there, a time and place that's easier to maintain that positive outlook?
I think, having not experienced life in a wheelchair prior to the Americans with Disabilities Act, and being, well, like, how do I get into this facility, or how,
Hmm.
where it has really affected me is going to visit friends, going to other people's homes for cookouts or something like that. It's like,
Sure.
I can't get into your house,
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those
Yeah.
things. Well, let's go to a restaurant then, because they
Yeah.
they do have, wheelchair accessibility and things like that. So it makes it easier in that regard. I have a friend of mine who's a few years older, but he's in a wheelchair because he's paralyzed from the waist down. And that's even more difficult. Like I said, I can
Hmm.
use my leg, I can stand up, I can do things that can help me to get around with a walker and things like that. He can't. I mean, he is totally
Right.
confined to his wheelchair, from his wheelchair to get onto the toilet, from his wheelchair to get into the bed, from, those are things that, like I said, I can get out of the wheelchair and get into the bed and get onto the toilet and things like that, get into the shower, and whereas he can't. So for me, I've really not known anything since the Americans with Disabilities Act made it easier for people like me in wheelchairs to get into public places. I mean, the hospital that I attend, where I go for treatment every 3 weeks, is totally accessible. I mean, I can get
Right.
in. Even the doorways to the treatment rooms are wider and things like that. So that's all been factored in. Like I said, where it's really difficult is, somebody's got 8 stairs to get up to their house. It's like, I'm
It's not
sorry,
happening.
it's not happening. Yeah. So,
Yeah, that's understandable. Um, so we talked about your first of your four truths. These four truths you came up with before having your leg amputated, correct?
I did, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, they've sort of been solidified. I was actually on a podcast where it was about what are your truths in life, and I'd never really codified those. I never, I sort of knew them, but I'd never like, well, write them down. What are they? And so yeah, so I came up with originally it was 3 truths. I've added the one that is number 3 now, fairly recently, I'd say within the last year or so. But yeah, I came up with these before I had my leg amputated.
So the first one was the control your mind or it will control you. What are the next three?
So the second one is embrace the pain and the difficulty that we all experience in life and
Hmm.
use that pain and difficulty to make you a stronger and more resilient individual. The third one, and this is the one is the most recent add to the list, is more of a legacy truth. And it's this: what you leave behind is what you weave in the hearts of other people. And then the fourth one, I think in a lot of ways is kind of self-explanatory. As long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. So I
Hmm.
use those 4 truths in addition to what I call my 3 F's, which are faith, family, and friends, to kind of help me, deal with the things that I've been dealing with, for these
Right.
last 10 years of cancer, that I have a rare form of melanoma that appears on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. It's not the traditional melanoma that we think of,
Hmm.
that's, too much sun exposure.
Hmm. Hmm. How do you how do you ensure on a day-to-day basis that you are following your truths? What do you do?
I mean, I when I am considering doing something, and I'm I'm fairly active in terms of my healthcare. I want my life to be based on the decisions that I made, not the ones that someone else made for me or the ones that I didn't make. So I'm constantly asking, why are we doing this? What's next? And does this go along with what I want to do? And when I had my leg amputated, I was 8 years into this cancer fight, and my oncologist wanted to. This is kind of a funny story. My oncologist wanted to put me on chemotherapy, and I said to him, "Is it going to save my life?" And he kind of gave me the shoulder shrug with, "Well, probably not, but it might buy you some more time." And like I said, I'm 8 years into this fight, and I said to him, I said, "I don't think I want to do that, given knowing what you have to go through with chemotherapy to have the outcome be the exact same thing if I didn't have it." I said, "But I'll go home and I'll talk to my family and see what decision I want to make." So I go home and I start telling my wife and daughter about what's going on. My daughter's immediately, "All right, we need a family meeting." I'm like, "Family meeting? There's three of us. It's not like we got a board here or something like that,
Yeah.
But we did. We went to the kitchen table and we sat around the kitchen table and we talked about how we each felt about me having chemotherapy. And then my daughter was like, "Okay, let's take a vote. How many people want dad to have chemotherapy?" And my wife and my daughter raised their hand. I'm like, "Wait a minute. Am I getting outvoted for something that I don't want to happen?" But I remembered back when I was a police officer in Cincinnati, Ohio. When I was in the Cincinnati Police Academy, our defensive tactics instructor used to have us bring a photograph of the people we loved the most to class. And as we were learning different ways to defend ourselves, we were to look at that photograph because he reasoned you will fight harder for the people you love than you will fight for yourself. So I ended up taking chemotherapy, not because I wanted to, but because I love my family more than I love myself. And in hindsight, it ended up being the right thing to do. It was kind of a bridge that got me to the point now where I'm on a clinical trial of a drug that probably won't save my life, but certainly has bought me several more years of a fairly quality life.
Yeah, yeah. That's actually, I think, a really good tip is if you, in whatever environment where you have to be working, concentrating really hard, put a picture of something that motivates you more than yourself, whether that's your family or something else. Do you have a
Yeah,
picture
your
of your
dog,
family on your
whatever. I mean,
desk?
whatever
Yeah,
it
your
is. Yeah,
dog, sure.
exactly. Sure.
Yeah, definitely. One thing that I think I was thinking about your portraits, something that I think is related to those and also to interior design, surprisingly, is making decisions. And I've seen choosing between two colors, cripple a couple before. So whether that's, usually it's an issue, obviously, that goes further than the decision that's at hand. But I was wondering if you had advice on applying maybe your four truths or maybe the three F's to making decisions that are really difficult, or maybe digging deeper and trying to understand why a simple decision is so difficult.
Yeah, I mean, there are people that I'm old enough to have been have ideas in organizations that death by meeting. We won't say no to it. We won't make a decision. We'll just meet until the thing dies. And I've seen that with people. I've seen that in the healthcare system. It sounds like you've seen that as an interior designer, where at least I've seen people that have said, "Okay, I've got cancer. Every decision in my life now I'm turning over to a doctor. I'm turning over to a medical assistant or a nurse practitioner or whoever it is to make decisions for me." And I'm not saying you shouldn't listen to those people. You absolutely should. They have the knowledge and the education and the expertise to advise you on what to do. But at the end of the day, it's your decision, and not making a decision is making a decision. I mean,
True.
it's just kind of a different way of looking at it. Eventually something's going to happen. The deadline's going to pass, or you as the designer are going to pick the color, and it's like, yeah, I think this is going to work best and stuff like that. And I'm sure where for you and certainly for doctors and nurses and stuff like that, where it's frustrating is, well, you didn't make a decision, so I made the decision, and now all of a sudden you don't like the decision. Now it's like, "Oh, I don't like that color. That doesn't look," well, you didn't make a decision, so I had to. I mean, somebody has to make a decision. And like I said,
Right.
even not making a decision is a decision. And I'm sure in your line of work, it's like, well, we're on a deadline. We
Mm-hmm.
have to, to get this finished so I can move on to another project and you can enjoy this space. I mean, in a lot of ways, healthcare, you can kind of hem and haw, and I've seen people do that. I'm just not one of those people that wants my life to be lived by somebody else. If
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go down, I want to go down on my terms. I want to go down making the decision that I believe is right for me. And I think a lot of that, this is kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but I think a lot of that, like for anything, we set goals in our lives. And why do we fail in a lot of those goals? I think the reason we fail is because what we don't do first before we set goals is determine our values, determine what's important in our life. What are things that, hey, I'm willing to die on this hill for it because it's that important to me. If you understand your values and then you form goals based on your values, you're much more likely to get to the point where those goals will be obtained because they're connected to something that's concrete, that means something in your life. Why do most New Year's resolutions fail? Because they're not connected to anything. It's like, oh, I want to lose weight. Well, what's the average by February? By mid-February, 80% of New Year's resolutions have gone by the wayside.
Right.
So I mean, why even start? I mean, if you don't attach it to something that means something to you, then I don't think there's a very good chance you're gonna obtain whatever that goal is.
Right. And having that value allows you to go back and reflect and probably help you make the decision that you need
Right.
to make the choice, because it will be based on, you have something to return to that's not just the end goal.
Exactly.
Yeah. I actually have started trying to incorporate that more with clients and saying, what is the purpose behind your family room? What things do you actually want to do in there? Do you want to hang out with family? Are you working in there? Like, let's get down to the basics, and what's the value to you behind that? How much better will your life be if you can get your family to hang out with you in your family room more often? And let's make decisions based off of that.
Right. Yeah. And this just isn't a room we're going to use to entertain once a month. This is a
Hmm.
place where we want our family to hang out and watch TV and, play games and do whatever,
And bond.
whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's important. And that makes sense to me. What's the desired outcome here?
Right.
And
Right.
I mean, for me, I want to live as long as I possibly can with a quality life. I'm not afraid to die. And I think I'm not afraid to die because I live, because I found my purpose in life and I lived that purpose. There's an old Native American Blackfoot proverb that I heard years ago that goes like this: when you were born, you cried and the world rejoiced. Live your life in such a way so that when you die, the world cries and you rejoice.
Ah,
Again, that's what's the outcome for life. That's what I want. I want the world to cry and for me to rejoice. That's the outcome of my life. How do I do that? Same thing where what's the outcome of this family room makeover?
hmm.
Well, what do you want to do with it? What do you desire here?
Right. Past just making it visually appealing.
Right. Yeah, I want to change the color of the walls. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
you don't need me. Just go hire a painter.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, Reading your bio, I was very interested in your SWAT team negotiation history. So I think you mentioned the state earlier, but I forgot where you were a SWAT team hostage negotiator.
Cincinnati, Ohio. I was a police
Cincinnati,
officer in
Ohio.
Cincinnati, and I was on the SWAT team there.
So I was curious. I'm sure you learned obviously a lot of negotiation tactics there, but I was curious if you could compare that to any sort of negotiation tactics you learned by being a high school basketball coach.
Yeah, boy, I honestly, I think I would probably want to negotiate with a homicide suspect more than I mean, it was interesting for me because, like I said, I have two brothers. I have no sisters. I went to an all-male Catholic high school in Chicago. I went to an all-male military college. So when my wife and I, got pregnant, well, she got pregnant. When we went to the OBGYN, it's like, do you want to know what the sex of the baby is? And we were like, absolutely, we do. And she said, well, you should buy pink. And I was like, oh, no, 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 no. You need to keep it in there till it's done. I have no idea what to do with a girl. And when I coached high school basketball, I coached girls. And
Okay.
again, that was an entirely different scenario for me because girls, I mean, girls are competitive and girls want to win, but girls, it's more important, I think, for the girls, because I've coached boys too. Boys, it's more about we want to compete and we want to win. For girls, yes, we want to compete and we want to win, but we want to develop relationships. We want to be close as a group. We want to be close as a team. And so that was something that I had to factor in to my coaching. And I'll tell you kind of a quick story. One day we're right in the middle of a game, and I pointed to one of the girls on the bench, and I was like, going for so and so, and she shakes her head in the affirmative, and I turn back around and I'm watching the game, and I kind of out of the corner of my eye look at the scores table, and there's nobody there. So I turn back to her, and I'm like, kind of a little more emphatically pointed to her, and I'm like, get in the game, and she shakes yes, and I turn around and think, well, she's not at the scores table again. So I call her to where I was, and I'm like, what's the problem? I need you in the game for so-and-so. And then the tears start coming out of the eyes. And I'm like, oh my God, are we going to have a counseling session right in the middle of a game? Here. And I said, what's wrong? And she said, I don't want to go in the game. I'm like, oh. And for me as a guy, the reward for working hard in practice was to play in the game. I'm like, what do you mean you don't want to go in the game? I educate me here. Well, I'm afraid I'm going to make a mistake, and my friends in the stands are going to make fun of me. And I'm like, what about your responsibility to your teammates? You come here every day. You work hard to make yourself and your teammates better. What about your responsibility to them? So honestly, we were having a counseling session, literally.
Yeah. You're negotiating, trying to get her
we
in the
were,
game.
and that's exactly. I'm like, how am I going to get this girl going into the game? And eventually I kind of played on, hey, you owe your teammates as much as you owe your friends in the stands. And I got her to go into the game. And yes, she made some mistakes. We all do that. I mean, nobody's perfect here. And that's okay. That's why we practice, so you minimize those mistakes. But yeah, so I mean, that was something, that was a concrete example of something that I did in terms of negotiating with a player to get into the game. I mean, as a SWAT team negotiator, it was a lot more. It was life and death. Usually the person had a gun, they were either, trying to kill themselves or trying to, had a hostage. So it was definitely much more of a, you got to get this right. And a couple of things I learned. Number one, the importance of trust. And I think that's important in any relationship, whether it's, whether you as a designer, me as a client, do I trust you? Do I think you have, my best interest in mind? Does this person who has a gun or, who has a hostage, do they trust me? And you really had to get down in the mud, in the weeds with these people, and had to, you would do a lot of what's called mirroring or parroting. So they would say something and then you would parrot it back to them, but you would attach an emotion to it. And you think, well, that's no big deal. Well, it is a big deal because you have to hit that emotion. I mean, if they're irate and screaming and, and cussing and all that kind of stuff, and you say something like, you seem like you're a little upset, you totally missed the emotion there. And so, and then because you missed the emotion, now some of that trust has been eroded and you have to work to get that back. So it's definitely a relationship, that you're trying to create. And, just like a boss or subordinate or a husband and wife or anything like that, child and a parent. And so, yeah, I learned quite a bit by doing that. That's definitely carried over into my life outside being on the SWAT team.
Yeah, I bet. How was it always in person, or did you ever do it on the phone as well?
Most of it was on the phone. I mean, we would do, some of it would be like on the other side of a door or something like that. We had what was called ballistic blankets that we could put up on the wall that would, if they shot out at us or something, would stop the bullets. So you're negotiating, I'm on one side of a door, the bad guy, so to speak, is on the other side. A lot of it was done over the phone. That was again, it's been a number of years. That's when a lot of people still have landlines. So one of the
Mm,
things we would do, we had technical people who would take down the person's phone line, would work with the phone company to take down the phone line so that one, nobody could call into them, like one of their friends or a family member. And two, they couldn't call out to somebody else. If they called out, they would get us. So we wanted to have that exclusivity. We needed that because a lot of times we had no idea why we were there. I mean, if you're going after a homicide suspect that somebody said is, in an apartment, why you're there. But a lot of times you get called out at, 2 o'clock in the morning and it's like, this guy's got a gun. Well, why? We don't know. And there were many times where, we'd spend 2 hours over here talking about something with a person when the real problem was over here. And we hadn't even
mm,
begun to discuss that. But part of that 2 hours was establishing rapport, was establishing trust. Can I trust you? Do I want to take you to where the real problem is? So you kind of had to
right.
go through that. And most of our negotiations took, anywhere from 2 to 5 hours. And about 90% of the time, we were successful at getting the person to either let the hostage out or to put the gun down and come out themselves. But I never lost a hostage. We never lost a hostage. But there were probably 10% of the time where the person was like, nope, I'm not going back to jail. I'm not dealing that. And it was their choice to end their life. And while that's always
Oh,
tragic,
yeah.
I don't mean to sound callous about this. I never lost any sleep over it because I know I had great training and I did the best I could to try to get them
Right.
out. It was their decision on how this was going to end.
You can't control their
No,
actions. Yeah, as you said, you can only do so much.
right.
Um, Shoot. Sorry, I just lost the question I was about to ask. Well, maybe it'll come back to me, but I was wondering what you learned about emotional control in yourself through being a SWAT team negotiator.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, a lot of times you had to, it depends on what you were trying to do. Were you trying to establish authority? Were you trying, to say that, hey, I'm the one in control here, you're not in control? There were times where you wanted the person to think they were in control. But then there were also times where it's like, no, no, no. I know who you are. I know, that this went wrong and now, you're surrounded and I'm talking to you. And things like that. So you had to kind of decide how you wanted to take it and where you wanted to go with it. I'll never forget there was one time, excuse me, and we trained every month and we trained with a psychologist, about we would do a scenario and then we would kind of debrief. Did you think about this? Or maybe the person was experiencing this. And we had this 15-year-old kid who had a gun and we had tried everything we could think of to try to get this kid out. And so we were kind of frustrated. And so it was like, all right, hey, we'll call you back. And we hung up and we kind of huddled together. And one of the guys was like, okay, we're going about this wrong. This is a kid. This is a
Mm,
15-year-old kid. Let's be his parent. Let's scare him. So we made up a plan. We were going to have the tactical team break a window and throw in what was called a flashbang grenade. It wasn't a grenade like that exploded where,
right.
it threw shrapnel. It made a loud noise and a bright light. And so we're like, well, let's just scare him and see if that works, see if we can get him out. And so we did. And we had the tactical team throw in a flashbang. And within like 5 minutes, here he comes. Like, no, I don't want to have any part of that. So sometimes you have to, you kind of have to figure out where they are emotionally. And
Hmm.
and you have to, like I said, you have to get down in the mud. You have to get down in the weeds with them and kind of mirror that emotion. And when they understand, like, hey, this guy gets me, this guy
Hmm.
understands where I'm coming from. Again, more trust is developed. And the way I like to talk about what we did is kind of think of a seesaw or a teeter totter that we all played on when we were kids, at the park. When we start negotiating with the person, their emotional side is way up in the air and their rational side is down on the ground. And over time, you get that teeter totter, hopefully to equilibrium and to where the rational side is up in the air and the emotional side is down on the ground. When you're emotional,
Interesting.
yeah, you don't make good decisions. When you're rational, you make much better decisions for yourself. So during that time where they're emotional and they're flailing around, they're yelling and screaming, you want to burn off. You want to ask them open-ended questions and get them to talk, to burn off that emotional energy to where you get that teeter-totter to where it's at equilibrium. And now you can start, because when you're emotional, that's not, you don't talk about coming out, you don't talk about putting the gun down, you don't talk about letting the hostages go, you don't talk about any of that, because that's just not the time to do it. You do it when the person is more rational. Oh, now it makes sense. Hey, they're kind of, you're wasting your time with that person. They're a nuisance. They're a drag on you. Why don't you just let them go? Oh yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I'll let them go. And now you get a
Right.
hostage out and stuff like that. And the other thing about it is we never gave anything without getting something in return. So people would be like, I want a cigarette. And we would be like, well, what are you giving me for it? What do you mean? Well, you got to give me something. Give me a magazine out of your gun, or give me some bullets, or give me some. So it was always we just didn't give you stuff. Or, I want something to eat. Well, what are you going to give us for it? Let one of the hostages go, or something like that. So it was kind of a quid pro quo thing. We get something, you get something.
What kind of questions would you ask to raise that teeter-totter?
It just depended. All we wanted them to do was keep talking. And so it depended on why we were there. And the way this worked, and there was a movie back in the 1990s called The Negotiator, and Samuel L. Jackson was the lead. And this guy was like Superman. He did everything. And I always get the question where people have seen the movie, is that the way it is? No, that's absolutely not the way it is. Yes, there is one primary negotiator who's on the phone, talking, but then there's another negotiator sitting right next to them, passing them notes. And then there are 3 or 4 more negotiators kind of out in the crowd, asking, why are we here? What do we know? What precipitated this and things like that. So as the primary, you may get a note that says, don't talk about his mother. Oh, okay. Because somebody, one of the negotiators out in the crowd said, well, right before this happened, he had a fight with his mother. Oh, okay, good. So that's good information. No, a lot of times we don't have that information. So, we would stay away from his mother and focus maybe on something else, and we would ask, why are we here today, John? And get John to talk. Well, we're here because of blah, 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 blah. And then, and think about this, we had to get real good with being comfortable with silence. So what would happen is we would ask that question and John would talk for a while, and then John would finish talking and would just stop. And we don't like that silence. We don't like that comfortableness, and we want to fill it. And so as negotiators, we had to resist filling that silence, because if you wait long enough, John will feel uncomfortable and John will start talking again. And that's exactly what we want. And so we would wait for him, and then he'd start up again. And then based on what he was saying, we would just ask him another. It's like, and maybe he'd say something about his mother. It's like, my mother's a whatever, and, start cussing her up or something like that. It's like, John, you seem really pissed off at your mother. Well, yeah, of course not. And then he starts talking again. So those are the kind of things that you burn off, that a lot of that emotional energy. And I mean, you know how it is when you're frustrated, when you're really mad. Not only are you psychologically into it, but physically you're into it as well. Your muscles are tense and your jaw's tense and things like that. Well, over several hours, that gets to be exhausting.
I bet.
And so, people start to wear down and things like that. And that's what you want, because now all of a sudden they're not crazy. Now they're more rational. Well, hey, John, how about putting the gun down? Or how about letting the hostage go? Yeah, I'm tired. I want to come out or something like that. That's where you get to the point where, okay, great. Hey, and coming out, getting that person out and getting the hostages out is a very, very critical point in time, because a lot of things can go wrong at that point in time that makes things, not so good. So you really kind of have to orchestrate it. You have to choreograph it, because one of the things the SWAT team does, if you're barricaded in a place, they'll tie off the door or the room. So even if you wanted to come out, you couldn't. And, and that's just, so the guy doesn't come out and start shooting all over the place. We want to be able to control that. And so, you as the negotiator are arranging this to go on. Well, if I'm on the phone with you, the tactical team isn't hearing that. So I've
Hmm.
negotiated, hey, I want to come out. Okay. Well, the guy tries to come out, the door's tied. He can't get out.
Yeah,
So, you
that's
kind of
not
have to
good.
coordinate all this. And, I thought you said I could come out. I can't get out, and so
Yeah.
it's a finely choreographed kind of art to get somebody out successful.
Yeah, I bet. Um, Thinking about the flashbang example that you gave, I'm curious if there was any other time, because I view that as, oh, you changed the environment and that affected his behavior. You changed his space. Is there another time where you did something like that that worked out successfully? Yeah.
Yeah, we would, if it's in the winter, we turn off the heat,
Oh,
and make it cold.
make him
If it's in the
uncomfortable.
summer, potentially we turn the heat on, turn the air conditioning
Wow.
off, turn the heat on, make it uncomfortable. You're sweating and stuff like that. Why don't you come out? So you're uncomfortable. The environment. And again, another reason why we're not going to give you some. I want some water. What are you going to give us? We want to get something, even if it's give me a cigarette, give me a bullet,
Yeah,
or something like that, where we had to do that. So yeah, we would try to make it uncomfortable for them, but you got to sort of balance that with the what about the hostages, if there are any. I mean, is
true.
this an elderly person who has some kind of medical conditions? Well, we're probably not going to turn the heat up or something like that in the summer, because you've got to take the hostages into consideration there. But it's
Right.
funny, when I first started on the team, I was so green. I didn't know anything. And I remember my first scenario, my first training scenario, very simple, hostage and a hostage taker behind a door. I was negotiating through the door. The hostage the entire time was screaming, help me, help me, help, and I somehow switched from focusing on the hostage taker to talking entirely to the hostage. And, and,
Wow.
and that's something you don't do. And so if you ever, hopefully you'll never be in that situation, but it seems like we're being really callous and we're being cold because we're spending all our time talking to the hostage taker and totally ignoring the hostage. I mean, we are to a point. We're really trying to minimize the hostage so that the person almost forgets about him. I don't have to deal with
I
him.
see.
That way I'm not, am I going to shoot him, or am I going to throw him out the window? Am I going to do something with him? So we want to minimize that. And that was something that was hard for me because I was compassionate. I wanted to help the hostage. Well, based on my work, helping the hostage was focusing on the hostage taker. And so
Right.
that was something I had to learn pretty early on.
Yeah, yeah, that does sound difficult. I was curious too how your experiences as a hostage negotiator influenced creating your four truths.
Um, that's a good question. I can't say, thinking back onto it, that that I really concentrated, any, it's like, oh, hey, I've learned this as a hostage. I'm not saying it didn't kind of creep in at
Hmm.
some point in time. I mean, it was really more, I think the four truths are more about resiliency, about, overcoming and adapting and things like that. Whereas negotiating was kind of putting yourself on the level, whatever that level was, with the hostage taker or with the barricaded person, to develop that trust, develop that relationship, and eventually get to the point where the person felt comfortable enough with you to come out. I'll give you kind of this is more one of the more, it's kind of a funny story, but it's a little more tragic. This gentleman wanted to commit suicide, and this started probably 8, 9 o'clock at night, and so he slit his wrists. Well, it didn't work, and then for some reason he thought it would make sense to turn his gas oven on and put his head in the oven.
Oh my
That didn't
gosh.
work either.
Yeah.
And then he called a relative, and the relative was smart enough to call the police. He had a gun now, and I was negotiating with him. And it was probably 2 o'clock in the morning, maybe 3 o'clock in the morning. And eventually, I think he was just tired, and he said, I want to come out. And I'm like, great, that's great. I said, if you come out, I said, I'll come down to the scene and we'll talk. We were on the phone. We'll talk face to face. And I said, but put the gun down, but take the phone with you. Well, he hung the phone up, which isn't uncommon because we're conditioned that when a conversation's over, we hang up the phone.
Sure.
About 15 seconds later, one of the tactical officers came on the radio and said, "We heard a gunshot." I thought, "Oh,
Oh
you didn't."
no.
He did, shot himself in the head, but he shot himself at an angle where the bullet went in at his temple, went around his skull underneath his skin, and came out the other side.
You're
And
kidding.
no,
Oh
no,
my gosh.
never penetrated his skull, never got to his brain. So here's somebody who tried 3 times in one evening to kill themselves, which I think was God's way of saying, "Nope, don't want you up
Oh
here right
yeah.
now. Sorry,
Absolutely.
you're going to go to the hospital." But that was somebody who, you know, that was somebody that was incredibly desperate and had gotten to a point we really never figured out why he did that.
Mhm.
We never understood why he wanted to kill himself. There was no note, there was nothing that was found afterwards in the investigation that found out why, but it wasn't his time to go. And I don't care how much you want to do something, if it's not your
Yeah.
time, it's
It's
not your
not your
time.
time.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that was
Wow.
kind of a funny story.
Yeah. You mentioned resiliency, and I'm curious if, looking back on your life, were there periods where you noticed your resiliency change or improve substantially, where you maybe didn't notice while you were going through something?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think a lot of my life, I look back on it in hindsight and it's like, oh, that's what I learned during that, or that's what I developed that, or that's when I got this or that, and so I mean, if there's that old saying about if you could live your life over again with all the knowledge and wisdom you have at your age, I mean, think how much better your life would be. But that's not the way life is. You
Right.
have to live your life going forward. So I think one of the things that I was fortunate enough, like I said, started playing basketball when I was 9 years old, played all the way up till I graduated from college. And I think one of the things that team sports taught me was the importance of being part of something that's bigger than yourself. You
Mm,
realize on the team that if you don't do your job, not only do you let yourself down, but you let your teammates down, your coaches down, your fans down, etc. And if you think about it, the biggest team game that we all play is this game of life. So, I mean, there were certainly times in my life where I was less resilient, but then something would happen that was, like my knee surgeries, that was like, wait a minute, that was a defining moment for me. I learned from that. I learned that, I could fight back from that. My second knee surgery, they took out 25 pieces of my bone, put me in a cast from my hip to my ankle, and told me that I would never play basketball again. And yet I still managed to come back and play in high school and get a scholarship to play Division I basketball in college. So,
wow.
that was a defining moment that, hey, you can do so much more than you ever thought you could do. I mean, don't get me wrong. We all have breaking points. We all have that point
Sure.
where I just can't go on. But that breaking point is so much further down the road than we ever give it credit for. My wife works with a young man who's a former Navy SEAL, some of the toughest men in the world. And the SEALs have what they call their 40% rule, which basically says that if you're at the end of your rope, you're done, you can't go on, you're only at 40% of your maximum. And you still have another 60% left in reserve to give to yourself. So, I see a lot of people, especially with cancer, where it's like, I can't do it anymore. I'm done. I'm through. You're not anywhere close to being done.
You're
But
only at 40%.
you're only 40%, and you still have so much more to give to yourself. So, like I said, I get those down days. I feel bad. I cry. I feel sorry for myself. But when I do, I remember that 40% rule. It's like, no, Terry, you got so much more left to give to yourself.
Yeah, yeah. That's I think that's a really beautiful way to end this to end this discussion. But this has been so interesting. Just such a different take on paying attention to your mindset and your inner self, and bringing that out. But and I'll put it in the show notes, but I wanted to give you a chance to tell people where they can connect with you and talk to you more.
Sure. So I have a blog. It's called Motivational Check. Every day I put up a thought for the day, and with that thought comes a question about maybe how you could apply that thought into your life. On Monday mornings, I put up the Monday morning motivational message, which is little bit longer of a video or a story or something like that. So motivationalcheck.com will get you to me. My book is called Sustainable Excellence, the 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. I've just started a membership based on that book. So if you want a free copy of my book, you can download it at sustainableexcellencemembership.com.
Awesome. That sounds great. Thank you so much, Terry.
Claire, thanks for having me on. I always say it's good people like you that allow me to come on and talk about my story. And hopefully between our conversation, we're going to make a positive difference in somebody's life. And if we do, today's been a good day.
Absolutely agree. Be sure to check out the complete show notes for today's episode at trimspaces.com/spacesspeak. The notes include a link to the YouTube video of the episode, the full guest's bio, links to connect with them, a summary of key ideas from the episode, and a photo of their favorite piece of furniture or decor.